So today, I want to tell you about one of the most extraordinary stories of this entire war. It is not a story about missiles. It is not a story about assassinations. It is not a story about nuclear weapons or ground invasions. It is a story about money. And it is a story about how the most powerful nation on earth, with the most sophisticated economic and military planners in the world, accidentally made its enemy richer than it has ever been. This is the story of how America accidentally made Iran rich. And I want to be very clear about something before we begin. Everything I'm about to tell you is based on real public statements made by real American officials. This is not speculation. This is not theory. These are the words of the United States Secretary of the Treasury and the head of the world's largest asset management company. So let us begin. Part 1. The problem America did not expect. So to understand how this happened, we first need to understand the problem that America faced when this war began. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury against Iran. Nearly 900 strikes in the first 12 hours. Supreme Leader Khamenei assassinated on day one. America went in with a clear plan and a clear expectation. The expectation was this: we hit them hard, we kill the leadership, we destroy their military capacity, and then Iran surrenders. Simple, clean, fast. But something happened that America did not expect. Iran fought back. And not just on the battlefield. Iran fought back economically. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, the 21M wide channel carrying approximately 1/5 of the world's entire oil supply closed. Tanker traffic dropped to near zero. Oil prices surged, and suddenly the entire global economy, the economy of every nation on earth, was under threat. And this created a massive problem for America because America went into this war expecting a quick, clean victory, not a prolonged conflict that could destroy the global economy. The Strait of Hormuz being closed was not part of the plan. And if it stayed closed too long, the economic damage would be catastrophic. So America needed a solution fast. Part 2. Scott Besson's brilliant plan. So, enter Scott Besson, the United States Secretary of the Treasury, the man responsible for America's economic strategy in this war. And Scott Besson stood up and said, "Do not worry. We anticipated this. We knew the Iranians might try to close the Strait of Hormuz. We have a plan." His plan was this: America would unsanction Russian oil and Iranian oil. By lifting sanctions on Russian oil, America could flood the global market with additional supply, keeping oil prices down despite the Strait of Hormuz closure. About 130 million barrels of Russian oil floating in storage released onto the market. And then, and this is where it gets really interesting, America said it might also unsanction Iranian oil itself, approximately 140 million barrels of Iranian oil sitting on the water, ready to be sold. The logic, as presented by Scott Bessant, was this: by allowing Iranian oil to flow, America would keep global oil prices down, prevent the global economic crisis that Iran was trying to trigger, and use Iranian barrels against the Iranians themselves to keep the price down for the next 10 to 14 days. It sounded clever. It sounded strategic. It sounded like a plan. But here's what actually happened. Part 3, the result. Iran makes $14 billion. So America unsanctioned Iranian oil, and Iran sold that oil. And in doing so, Iran made approximately $14 billion. $14 billion. Just like that. Now, I want you to hold that number in your mind for a moment. $14 billion. Now, here is the other number I want you to hold in your mind. The total Iranian military budget for one entire year is $10 billion. Let me say that again. America's plan to weaken Iran gave Iran $14 billion in days. Iran's entire annual military budget is $10 billion. So, in the process of trying to keep oil prices down and prevent an economic crisis, America handed its enemy more money than Iran spends on its entire military in a full year. This is what it calls American genius at work. Think about what just happened here. America went to war with Iran specifically to destroy Iran's economy, specifically to cut off Iran's revenue, specifically to bring the Iranian government to its knees financially. That was the entire economic strategy. And in responding to Iran's Strait of Hormuz closure, America did the exact opposite. It lifted the sanctions that were keeping Iran poor. It allowed Iran to sell oil. It had been blocked from selling for years. And it handed Iran $14 billion in days. The plan designed to destroy Iran's economy accidentally supercharged it. Part 4. Larry Fink and the trap that cannot be escaped. And now here is where this story gets even more complicated because the consequences of what happened go far beyond just those $14 billion. Let me introduce you to Larry Fink. Larry Fink is the head of a company called BlackRock. BlackRock is the largest asset management company in the entire world. They control trillions and trillions of dollars of global investments. When Larry Fink speaks, the entire global financial world listens. And Larry Fink was recently interviewed by the BBC. And what he said reveals the full depth of the trap that America has walked into. He said this, if we stop this war now, if there is a cessation of fighting and Iran still controls the Strait of Hormuz, then we can expect oil prices above $100, closer to $150 for years and years. And what does that mean for the global economy? He said it clearly. We will have a global recession. So let me make sure you understand what Larry Fink is actually saying here. The head of the world's largest investment company is saying that America cannot stop this war. Not because of military strategy, not because of geopolitical interest, but because stopping the war while Iran still controls the Strait of Hormuz would cause oil prices to stay above $100 for years. And that sustained oil price would trigger a global recession. America now finds itself in a position that few policymakers anticipated and even fewer are willing to publicly acknowledge. What was expected to be a rapid, decisive campaign has instead evolved into a complex and deeply entangling conflict. A quick victory has proven elusive. But more importantly, the option of simply ending the war is no longer as straightforward as it once seemed. Because ending the conflict under current conditions could mean accepting a reality in which Iran retains significant influence over the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage through which a substantial portion of the world's energy supply flows. If that influence translates into prolonged disruptions or sustained risk premiums, global oil prices could remain elevated for years. And that, in turn, carries the very real possibility of long-term economic strain, not just for one country, but for the entire global system. This is the strategic tension at the heart of the situation. Continuing the war carries escalating costs and uncertainty. But ending it without altering the balance of control in critical energy corridors could introduce a different kind of instability, one rooted in markets, inflation, and global growth. It is not that there are no options. It is that every option now comes with significant trade-offs. And therein lies the deeper irony. Much of the current economic disruption, volatile oil prices, strained supply chains, and fears of a broader slowdown emerged only after the conflict began. Prior to this escalation, global energy flows, while never perfectly stable, were largely functioning within expected parameters. The present crisis is not just a battlefield development, it is also the result of how geopolitical decisions ripple outward into the global economy in ways that are difficult to fully predict. One of the most counterintuitive consequences of this conflict has been its impact on Iran's economic positioning. For decades, sanctions had limited Iran's integration into global markets. Its ability to sell oil freely was restricted. Its access to international finance constrained, and its participation in global trade carefully controlled. That isolation was not incidental. It was a central pillar of broader economic strategy. Yet, under the pressures of conflict and the need to stabilize global energy markets, some of these constraints have been partially relaxed or bypassed in practice. As energy demand persists and supply becomes more uncertain, countries begin to make pragmatic decisions. Major importers, such as China, continue to secure energy wherever it is available, while regional actors navigate the situation through negotiation and strategic alignment. The result is not a full reintegration of Iran into the global economy, but rather a gradual and uneven re-engagement driven by necessity. This shift has important implications as Iran becomes more economically connected. Even if only in specific sectors like energy, it gains leverage. Not absolute power and not without constraints, but leverage nonetheless. And with that leverage comes a change in incentives. The longer the current dynamics persist, the more opportunities emerge for revenue generation, trade relationships, and strategic positioning. That does not mean the conflict is economically beneficial in a simple sense. War is costly for all sides, and Iran faces its own internal pressures and limitations, but it does suggest that the original expectation that sustained pressure would quickly weaken Iran economically has not unfolded in a straightforward way. Instead, the situation has become more complex, with outcomes that cut in multiple directions at once. Nowhere is this complexity more visible than in discussions surrounding the Strait of Hormuz itself. This narrow waterway handles a significant share of global oil and liquefied natural gas shipments, making it one of the most strategically important chokepoints on Earth. Even limited disruption can send shockwaves through global markets. There has been growing speculation about what long-term control or influence over this corridor could mean. Some analyses suggest that if any single actor were able to exert sustained leverage over transit, whether through formal mechanisms or informal pressure, it could translate into substantial economic value. However, projections of massive toll revenues, such as figures in the hundreds of billions annually, should be treated with caution. In reality, enforcing such a system would face enormous legal, military, and geopolitical challenges, and would likely trigger significant international pushback. Still, the broader point remains valid. Control, or even perceived control, over critical energy routes translates into influence. And influence, in a tightly interconnected global economy, can be just as powerful as direct financial gain. When we step back and look at the full picture, a pattern begins to emerge. The original objective of the campaign was to weaken Iran economically, reduce its revenue streams, and limit its strategic reach. Yet, the interplay between military action and economic necessity has produced outcomes that are far less predictable. Efforts to stabilize global markets can sometimes create openings. Attempts to apply pressure can generate unintended adaptations. This does not mean that the strategy has failed outright, nor does it mean that the long-term outcome is already determined. What it does mean is that modern conflicts, especially those involving energy, finance, and global supply chains, rarely follow a simple script. Actions taken in one domain can produce consequences in another, often in ways that only become visible over time. Even voices from the financial world, including leaders like Larry Fink of BlackRock, have highlighted the broader risks associated with prolonged instability in energy markets. Sustained high oil prices can act as a drag on global growth, increasing the likelihood of recessionary pressures. But these are risk scenarios, not inevitabilities, and they depend on a wide range of variables, from policy responses to market adaptations. In the end, what we are witnessing is not a simple story of success or failure, but a complex unfolding of cause and effect. A conflict intended to reshape the economic balance has instead revealed how deeply interconnected that balance truly is. And as the situation continues to evolve, the most important question is not just what has happened, but what happens next. Because in a world where energy, economics, and geopolitics are tightly linked, even the most carefully designed strategies can produce outcomes that no one fully anticipated.